My name is Jonathan Ward. I am 55 years old, and what I am about to tell you is not a story I am proud of. It is the truth of my life told in my own words, stripped bare of excuses, free of lies. You may judge me when you hear it. You may hate me, pity me, or perhaps see a reflection of your own mistakes in mine. But whatever you feel, I ask you to listen. Because this is not just the story of a man. It is the confession of someone who lived too long with regret. I was not born into wealth. My father was a steelworker, his hands calloused, his back bent from years of labor. My mother cleaned houses to make sure there was food on the table. We were not poor enough to starve, but we were never comfortable either. And from an early age, I learned that if I wanted more out of life, I would have to fight for it. As a boy, I would lie awake at night in our small apartment, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, dreaming of a life where I didn't have to count coins before buying bread. I promised myself I would never live like that when I was grown. Ambition was the fire in my chest, and I let it consume me. By the time I was in my 20s, I had already built a reputation for being relentless. I was not the smartest in the room, but I was the hungriest. I would outwork anyone, stay longer, push harder, sacrifice whatever I had to. People admired me, but they also feared me. Because when you're that determined, you stop seeing people as people. You see them as stepping stones. And then came Rebecca. Rebecca was not just a woman. She was a storm, beautiful in a way that turned heads when she entered a room, but sharp enough to cut through my armor with just a look. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Where others saw a man obsessed with success, she saw a boy still running from poverty, still afraid of being nothing. For the first time, I slowed down, for her. She had this way of making the noise stop, of pulling me back into the moment when all I wanted to do was race ahead. With Rebecca, I felt alive in a way that no deal, no money, no victory ever gave me. She was my anchor, my compass, my home. We married young, and for a while I believed I had everything. The business I was building, the money that finally began to flow, and the love of a woman who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. I thought I had beaten the odds. I thought I had finally escaped the shadows of my childhood. But here's the truth I learned too late. Sometimes, when you chase everything, you end up losing the only thing that matters. The business grew, and so did my hunger. Deals became my obsession. I told myself I was doing it for us, for the future we deserved. But the long nights at the office, the missed dinners, the broken promises, they weren't for us. They were for me, for my pride. For the boy inside me who still wanted to prove he was more than a steelworker's son. Rebecca tried to reach me. She begged me to slow down, to come back to her, to remember the man she married. But I didn't listen. I thought love could withstand anything. I thought she would always be there waiting, until the day she wasn't. I came home one night long after midnight expecting to find her asleep. Instead, I found a note, just a few lines written in her delicate handwriting. Words I will never forget. I can't do this anymore, Jonathan. I loved the man you were, but I don't recognize the man you've become. She was gone. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a house that used to be filled with laughter and find only silence? To realize that the very thing you thought you were building everything for has slipped through your fingers? That night I sat on the floor of our living room with her note in my hands, and for the first time in years I cried. I lost Rebecca, not because she stopped loving me, but because I stopped being present. And the cruel irony is that all the wealth, all the success, all the power I chased meant nothing without her. That was the first betrayal in my life. Not hers, mine. I betrayed the woman who gave me her heart, and I drove her away. And though the years would go on to break me in ways I could never have imagined, it was that night, sitting alone with her note in my hands, that the cracks in Jonathan Ward truly began. Because when you lose the person who was your compass, you lose yourself. And I was about to lose much more than that. When I look back at those days, it almost feels like a blur, a distorted photograph where the outlines are clear, but the colors have all faded. After everything that happened, I stopped trusting people. I stopped trusting even my own instincts because they had betrayed me once already. My life became mechanical. I woke up, went to work, came back, ate alone, and then lay awake most nights wondering why it all had to happen to me. For years I lived like that. In silence, in shadows, in anger that was buried so deep inside me it felt like another organ, living, breathing, waiting. I never spoke of it to anyone. Not my colleagues, not the neighbors, not the few relatives I had left. They thought I was simply tired of socializing, that I had grown distant because of age or disinterest. Nobody knew that my silence wasn't peace, it was a cage, and I was trapped inside it. Then something changed. It wasn't sudden, but it was undeniable. I met someone purely by chance who reminded me that the world wasn't entirely rotten. It was a young man at the local library. He must have been in his early 20s, full of that reckless energy only youth carries. He struck up a conversation with me about a book I had checked out, and somehow in the middle of our casual talks, he asked me something no one had dared in years. "What's your story?" That question hit me like a storm. My story. Did I even have the right to call it mine anymore? For so long it had been defined by betrayal, by scars, by silence. But his curiosity stirred something. I didn't tell him everything, of course, but I shared just enough that he could see the cracks in my mask. He listened, really listened, and for the first time in decades I felt my words had weight. And then, almost unintentionally, I found myself opening up more, not to him alone, but to myself. I started writing my thoughts down at night, long paragraphs that bled out of me like wounds reopening. Every memory resurfaced, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, the years wasted. And slowly those words turned into clarity. I realized I had lived half a lifetime as a prisoner to what they did to me. That was the moment the idea of revenge returned to me. It wasn't the reckless kind, not the kind you see in young men who fight with fists and break things out of fury. No, my revenge was colder, older, sharper. It had matured like bitter wine, waiting for the right time to be poured. I knew where they were now. Age had not been kind to them either, but they lived comfortably, almost arrogantly, as if the sins of the past had been erased. But sins don't erase, they stain, and the stain was still there. I could see it in the smug way they carried themselves. So I began to plan. It started small. I gathered information quietly, carefully, like I used to in my younger years. Old contacts, public records, even social media. The world makes it far too easy to trace people nowadays. I pieced together their lives, where they worked, who they knew, what they owned. Every detail mattered, because I knew this revenge wasn't about violence. It was about dismantling them from the inside out, the way they once dismantled me. And as I collected those details, I felt myself come alive again. For years I had thought I was finished, just waiting for the clock to run out. But revenge gave me purpose. It gave me energy I didn't know I still had. I would wake before dawn, scribbling notes, making phone calls, connecting dots. It was dangerous, yes, but I felt no fear, only determination. The young man from the library noticed the change in me. He told me my eyes looked different, sharper, like someone who had found direction again. He didn't know what I was doing, of course. I couldn't tell him. This wasn't his burden. But his presence had awakened me, reminded me that my story wasn't over yet. The day I finally set the first move in motion, I remember the weather clearly. Gray skies, a slight drizzle, that smell of wet earth filling the air. I watched from a distance as the wheels of my plan began to turn, and inside me I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. Power. Quiet, controlled, undeniable power, and once I tasted it, there was no turning back. The deeper I sank into my plan, the clearer everything became. Life, for the first time in years, had a rhythm again. Each morning I would wake with purpose, my mind already racing with details. What seemed impossible once now felt inevitable, because when a man has nothing left to lose, he becomes the most dangerous kind of enemy. I spent days and nights revisiting every old wound they had given me. Each betrayal was fuel, each scar a reminder of why I couldn't stop now. I wasn't just fighting for the man I had once been. I was fighting for the decades stolen from me. They thought time had buried it all, but time does not bury. It preserves, it hardens, and when the moment is right, it delivers the past back like a blade to the throat. My first step was financial. I had discovered one of them had built a small empire of businesses, all propped up on weak foundations. It was almost poetic. He who once profited from my destruction now lived lavishly on fragile lies. I didn't need to confront him physically, I just needed to pull one string. Quietly, methodically, I began exposing his weaknesses. A document here, a false lead there, whispers in the right ears. Slowly, his empire began to shake. I remember the satisfaction of reading the first article online about his company being investigated. I didn't even have to lift a weapon. Words, information, patience, those became my weapons. Watching him squirm under the weight of his own corruption was better than any physical blow I could have delivered. But I wasn't finished. Another one of them lived a different life. Quiet on the surface, but dirty underneath. He had secrets, dark ones, buried deep. I dug them out, piece by piece, until I found the one thing that could break him completely. I won't say what it was. Some truths are too poisonous to repeat. But I will say this. When I sent the evidence to the right people, his mask shattered. He was exposed. He lost everything, and still I didn't stop because revenge is not a single act. It is a journey. It is a slow burn that eats away at those who once thought themselves untouchable. What surprised me most, however, was how I felt through it all. I didn't feel young again. I felt alive. I wasn't chasing happiness. I wasn't seeking peace. I was chasing justice in the only form left to me. Some nights I would stare at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the man looking back. The lines on my face were the same, but my eyes, they had changed. They carried a fire that had long been extinguished. One evening, as I sat in my study surrounded by notes and documents, the young man from the library visited me again. He noticed the clutter, the late nights, the obsession. He asked me gently if I was all right. I lied, of course. Told him I was working on personal projects, trying to reconnect with the past in a positive way. He believed me, or at least pretended to. But the truth was, I couldn't let him see the darkness I was drowning in. He was too pure, too untouched by the filth I carried. By the time the third man in that old circle fell, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't make the scars disappear. But it does balance the scale. And sometimes balance is all a man needs to feel whole again. I thought of confronting them directly, standing before them, demanding they see me and remember what they did. But then I realized, no, that would give them too much. They didn't deserve my voice, my presence, my time. They deserved silence, the kind that crushes. The kind where they look around and wonder who pulled the strings, who turned their lives into ash, and never find the answer. That, I decided, was the purest revenge of all. But still, late at night, when the world was quiet, I would sit alone and ask myself, what comes after? What happens when the last of them falls? What does a man live for when his revenge is finally complete? And though I didn't yet know the answer, I knew this. My story wasn't over. Not yet. I had thought the worst was behind me, but I was wrong. The truth is, when you spend decades of your life building something, trust, family, a reputation, and you watch it shatter, you don't simply move on. You carry the shards inside you. They cut you at the most unexpected moments. That was me in the months that followed. I carried the weight of betrayal in my chest like broken glass, sharp and unrelenting. I remember waking up some mornings and staring at the ceiling, wondering if any of it had been real. The laughter, the family dinners, the whispered promises, had it all just been a carefully constructed performance? My mind replayed conversations with her, the way she had smiled when she spoke about loyalty, about forever. And then I would remember the documents, the undeniable proof of what she had done behind my back, and the smile I once adored would twist into something venomous. But I didn't want to live the rest of my life as a man broken by betrayal. No, I wanted them to feel it. Every ounce of pain, every sleepless night, every shred of dignity I had lost. I wanted them to taste it until they choked on it. That thought became my fuel. The first step was patience. I had learned long ago that revenge is not served in haste. It requires precision, planning, and a calmness that burns like slow fire. So I began to observe. I watched her patterns, her new routines, the people she surrounded herself with. I didn't make my presence obvious, but I left small traces, little reminders that I was still there, still watching. A message left unanswered, a phone call that rang once and stopped. A familiar song played on the radio when she entered her favorite cafe. She wouldn't know for certain it was me, but deep down she would feel it, that sense of being haunted. There's a strange power in making someone doubt their own peace. I could imagine her looking over her shoulder, wondering if I was nearby. That fear, it was the beginning of my revenge, but I didn't stop there. I knew she had built a fragile little world after leaving me, one where appearances mattered more than anything. I began to pull at the strings of that world. Quietly, carefully, the friends who thought she was flawless, they started hearing whispers, subtle truths dropped in the right ears. The man she leaned on for comfort, he received pieces of information he couldn't ignore, not lies, but the truth she had hidden from him, just enough to fracture trust. I didn't need to destroy her with violence. Words and truth are weapons far sharper than knives. There were nights I would sit alone with a glass of whiskey, the city lights stretching endlessly outside my window, and I would think, is this who I am now? A man reduced to shadows and schemes? But then I would remember her laughter with him, the betrayal written across those hidden messages, and the fire would rise in me again. Yes, this was who I had to be now. The more I acted, the stronger I felt. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. She had tipped the scale and I was restoring it. Piece by piece, her carefully crafted image began to crack. And the beauty of it was, no one could trace it back to me. To the world, I was just Jonathan. Older, quieter, trying to rebuild his life. But underneath, I was pulling every string that mattered. Then one night I received a call. A voice on the other end said something simple. "She's breaking." I didn't ask how they knew or who they were. I just sat there in silence, letting the words sink into me like a bomb. She was breaking. Not destroyed yet, not shattered beyond recognition, but the cracks were deep enough that the collapse was inevitable. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't enough. The part of me that once wanted peace was gone. I didn't just want her to stumble. I wanted her to fall. Not just to cry, but to understand what it feels like to have your very soul betrayed. That was the lesson she owed me, and I wasn't finished until she learned it. So I planned again, deeper this time. More ruthless, the kind of revenge that leaves scars no one else can see, but the victim feels every single day. I wasn't a young man anymore, but perhaps that was my advantage. At my age, patience is not just a virtue, it's survival, and I would survive this. More than that, I would rise from it. But before I could, she had to drown in the very storm she created. By the time I reached my mid-50s, life had a way of slowing me down, forcing me to sit in silence and listen to the echoes of my own choices. I had carried so many burdens, so many secrets, and though the world around me kept spinning, my own world felt heavy, like it was dragging me through mud. People often think age makes you wiser, but what they don't understand is that age also makes the past heavier. Mistakes you thought you buried rise back up like ghosts. Every face you wronged finds its way into your memory, and every betrayal you witnessed begins to haunt your nights. There were mornings when I would wake up, look in the mirror, and wonder if the man staring back at me was a stranger. His hair had thinned, his eyes carried shadows, his shoulders bore invisible weights. I had fought battles, lost friends, and seen love turn into hate. Revenge had guided so many of my steps that sometimes I forgot what peace even looked like. But deep down, I also knew this story of mine wasn't just about destruction, it was about survival. And survival in its own way is a cruel kind of revenge. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in blood orange, I sat in the old wooden chair on my porch. The streets outside were quiet, the kind of silence that stretches into your bones. I closed my eyes and thought of the people who had shaped my life. My enemies, yes, but also those who had once been friends. Isabella came to my mind again, the woman who once believed in me before lies and manipulation tore everything apart. And Marcus, my oldest friend, who had turned his back when money was involved. I remembered how easily trust had crumbled, and how quickly betrayal had grown in its place. It was strange. I had spent years chasing retribution, yet in those quiet evenings I realized revenge was not always fire. Sometimes it was patience. Sometimes it was letting your enemies destroy themselves while you simply endured. And endure I had. The men who tried to break me ended up broken by their own greed. The ones who thought I was weak lived long enough to see that I was the last one standing. Perhaps that was my revenge all along. Not the fights, not the anger, but the simple fact that I was still here to tell my story. But don't mistake me for a saint. No, my hands are far from clean. There were nights when rage consumed me, when I hunted those who wronged me with a clarity that bordered on madness. There are names I cannot say aloud anymore, faces I see in my dreams, because I know their absence in this world is because of me. That is my truth, my burden. You see, revenge has a way of carving pieces out of your soul until you no longer recognize yourself. And yet, in the middle of all that darkness, I found a strange kind of clarity. I remember one particular night vividly. Rain hammered the streets, the city drowning in storm. I walked alone, coat-drenched, mind racing. I had been given information about a man, one who had betrayed me decades ago, setting off a chain of events that nearly destroyed my family. My hands trembled, not from the cold but from the rage that rose inside me like fire. I thought, this is it. This is the moment I finish what began so long ago. But when I finally stood before him, older, weaker, almost broken himself, I froze. His eyes looked at me not with fear but with emptiness. He was already punished by life. His body betrayed him. His children had abandoned him. His wealth had vanished. And in that instant I understood something cruel, Sometimes the universe carries out revenge for you. I turned and walked away. My fists unclenched, my rage dissolved into something heavier. Pity. That night I went home, sat alone in the dark and whispered to myself, maybe the greatest revenge is living when they expect you to fall. Maybe the greatest revenge is outlasting them. Now at 58, as I tell you these pieces of my life, I don't claim to be proud. But I claim to be honest. And honesty is the one weapon no one can strip away from me. I am Jonathan. A man who has loved, lost, fought, betrayed, and avenged. A man whose story is not perfect but real. And if there is one truth I carry with me into the nights that remain, it is this. Vengeance does not end the pain, but it keeps the fire alive long enough to remind you that you are still here. The nights grew longer, and silence became my closest companion. After everything I had endured, after every betrayal and every fight, the weight of my own survival pressed heavier on my chest. I wasn't the man I used to be. Too much had been taken, too much had been burned away. But I was still here, and sometimes that was enough. I would sit alone, staring at the walls, feeling the echoes of voices long gone. Some were enemies, some were friends, and some were people I once loved. Their faces lived inside my memory, sharper than any blade, louder than any storm. I tried to push them away, but they always came back, reminding me of the choices I had made, the lives I had ended, the roads I had left behind. There were moments when I almost wished for an end, for a clean break from this constant war inside my head. But then I remembered why I had fought, why I had carried my anger like a weapon for so many years. It wasn't just revenge anymore, it was survival. Every scar on my body, every sleepless night, was proof that I had outlived those who tried to bury me. And in a way that was victory enough. The world had moved on without me. Old friends had built new lives, children had grown into strangers, and places I once called home no longer felt the same. Time had changed everything, but time could never erase what I carried within me. That was my curse, and also my truth. I often wondered what forgiveness might have felt like, if letting go would have given me peace. But I never found that road. My heart was too heavy, too stubborn, too scarred. Forgiveness was for people untouched by betrayal, for people who still believed in trust. For me, there was only memory, and memory was enough to keep the fire alive. And yet in the quiet hours of the night there was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Strange calm. A realization that maybe I didn't need to fight anymore, because the fight was already won. Not by blood, not by weapons, not by vengeance carried out in shadows, but by the simple fact that I was still breathing. Every enemy who had sworn to destroy me was gone while I remained. Survival itself had become the greatest revenge. I don't know how many days I have left. My body is slower, my strength fading. But my voice, this story, will outlive me. The truth I've spoken will carry further than I ever could. And that, in the end, is enough. What they took from me, they never gave back. What I lost, I will never recover. But what I became, that is mine and no one can take it. The storms have passed. The fire has burned. And all that remains is the echo of a man who refused to disappear. And with that, the story ends. Not in triumph, not in peace, but in truth.